Help, my brother's dying. An 8-year-old girl screamed from a mansion window while her 4-year-old brother burned with fever inside. The woman who was supposed to protect them refused to call a doctor. 5 miles away, a man heard the news. A man who had killed 10 people with his bare hands. A man the whole town feared.
Gideon Horsey.
But this isn't a story about a killer.
Posa.
This is a story about a basket of eggs and the love that changed everything. Drop a like, subscribe if you are new, and comment in where you're watching from. Let's begin. The winter wind cut through Cedar Ridge, Wyoming like a blade through bone. February of 1889 brought the kind of cold that made men question their faith and mothers count their children twice before sleep. In the darkness of a back alley, Benjamin Fletcher stood perfectly still, his right hand resting on the Colt 45 at his hip, his left hand trembling against his will. Through a gap in the warped boards of a leaning cabin, he watched something that tore open wounds he thought had scarred over 5 years ago. A woman knelt on bare wooden floors. 3 children sat around a table made from shipping crates. On a chipped tin plate lay potato peelings, bread heels hard as stone, and bacon grease, scraped so thin it was nearly transparent. The lamplight flickered through the gaps in the walls, making shadows dance like ghosts across their hollow faces. The woman divided the scraps with hands that shook. Not from cold, though the cabin held no warmth. Not from fear, though fear lived in every corner of poverty. Her hands shook from hunger, from exhaustion, from the weight of keeping 3 souls alive when her own body was consuming itself to do it. She smiled as she worked, lips curved upward while her eyes remained empty. Ben had seen that smile before, on his mother's face 30 years ago, on dying soldiers who lied about their wounds, on his wife Catherine in the hours before men came and destroyed everything. The oldest child, a girl of perhaps 8 years, touched her mother's sleeve with careful fingers. "Mama, aren't you eating?" The woman's smile never wavered. Her voice carried the bright, false cheer of mothers throughout history who have lied to save their children from truth. "I had plenty earlier, sweet girl." 2 days. Ben had been watching this cabin for 2 days. The woman, Emma Harrison, had not eaten in 48 hours. He knew because he had counted every moment she went without the way a man counts bullets before battle or breaths before drowning. The lie hung in the cold air like visible breath. The youngest boy, no more than 4, swung his feet beneath the crate table. His eyes held the terrible optimism of children who do not yet understand that tomorrow might bring nothing. "Can I have butter, Mama? I like butter." Emma Harrison's smile grew wider even as something died behind her eyes. "Not tonight, Noah, but maybe tomorrow." "You always say tomorrow." "Because tomorrow is full of possibilities." She touched his hair with a tenderness that made Ben's chest feel as if someone had wrapped wire around his ribs and pulled tight. He had seen that gesture too. Catherine used to touch their unborn son that way, hand on her swollen belly, promise in every movement that she would protect him, keep him safe, give him a world worth living in. Catherine had kept none of those promises, not because she broke them willingly, because 3 men had come to their ranch while Ben was away buying cattle, because violence cares nothing for promises or mothers or the small lives growing inside them. Ben pulled back from the break in the wall. His breath came white and fast in the frozen air. The horse that waited for him in deeper shadow was a war mount, a gray gelding that had carried him through the Indian Wars, through the Red River Campaign, through days when Ben had been younger and believed killing served a purpose beyond adding weight to a man's soul. His saddlebags hung heavy with supplies: flour, salt, coffee, eggs wrapped in straw, bacon thick as a man's thumb, sugar and milk and cornmeal. Enough food to feed one wealthy bachelor living alone in a house built for a family that would never fill it. More than enough to feed 4 people who were slowly starving in plain sight of a town that looked away. Ben mounted the gray and rode toward his ranch without looking back at the cabin. But the image followed him, the woman dividing garbage into portions, the children eating scraps with the gravity of communion. The smile that was really a scream turned inward. He knew that smile. His mother had worn it the winter they had nothing. When she did laundry for other families until her hands bled and fed him bread while telling him she had already eaten. When a sack of flour appeared on their doorstep one morning with no name attached, just 50 pounds of mercy that kept them alive until spring work came. Ben had never learned who left that flour, but he had learned what it meant, that sometimes kindness required no recognition, That one person's silent act could stand between a family and the grave. That hands could give as well as take. His hands had taken so much. 7 Kiowa warriors in the canyons near Red River. Young men with families of their own, probably, fighting for land that had been theirs before maps and treaties declared otherwise. Ben remembered their faces, would remember them until his own face went into the ground. The way the first one had looked at him was surprise, as if shocked that depth could come from such an ordinary-looking white soldier. Then 3 more. The Jessup brothers. Land grabbers and thieves, but that was not why Ben killed them. He killed them because they had done to Catherine what war had taught him men could do to women. Because they had beaten her, dragged her, caused her to give birth 2 months early in a spreading pool of her own blood. Because his son Michael had lived for 2 hours, just long enough for Ben to arrive home and hold him while he died. The Jessup brothers died over 72 hours. Ben made sure of that, made sure they understood what they had taken from him, made sure their last moments stretched like Catherine's must have stretched endless and full of pain and the knowledge that no help was coming. The sheriff had found their bodies in an abandoned line shack. All 3 killed with bare hands. No guns, no mercy, just rage given form in broken bones and torn flesh. No jury in Wyoming territory would have convicted Ben. Everyone knew what the Jessup brothers had done, but Ben had convicted himself. 5 years in a courtroom that never closed, where the only judge was memory, and the only sentence was to keep breathing when he did not deserve to. The ranch house rose against the night sky like a monument to emptiness. 8 rooms that echoed, furniture that no one sat in. A nursery with a crib Ben could not bring himself to dismantle. Martha Hayes, his housekeeper of 10 years, kept the place clean, with the dedication of someone who understood that routine was sometimes the only thing preventing a man from walking into the barn with a rope. She met him at the door, her weathered face creasing with the concern she never quite managed to hide. "You're late, Mr. Fletcher." I was starting to worry. Ben handed her his coat, careful not to meet her eyes. Martha had a way of seeing through walls he had spent 5 years building. "Got held up in town. I'm not hungry tonight, Agnes." She had asked him 1,000 times to call her Martha. He kept calling her Agnes because distance felt safer than intimacy. Even with a woman who had known him since before Catherine, since before the war, since back when he still believed he might be something other than a weapon with a pulse. "You have to eat something. You've been skin and bones since—" She caught herself, but they both knew how that sentence ended. Since Catherine. Since Michael. Since the day Ben Fletcher stopped being a man and became a haunted house walking on 2 legs. "I said I'm not hungry." The sharpness in his voice made her step back. He regretted it immediately. Martha deserved better than his poison. "Forgive me, I saw something today that shook me." Her expression softened. 10 years meant she knew his moods better than he did. "Want to talk about it?" "No." Then contradicting himself because honesty sometimes ambushed him when he was tired. "The widow Harrison. You know her." Martha's face shifted, recognition and sadness mixing. "Emma Harrison. Her husband Robert died about 18 months back. Lumber accident, I heard terrible business. She keeps to herself mostly. Too proud for her own good, some say." "What do you mean, too proud?" "The church ladies tried to help her after Robert died, brought baskets, offered charity. She thanked them polite, but said she was managing fine." Martha paused, measuring her next words. "Managing on scraps and stubbornness, more like. 3 children. The oldest can't be more than 8. Heard they've been going without, more often than not." Ben thought of Emma Harrison's trembling hands as she divided potato peelings, her bright smile masking starvation, her voice full of false cheer as she lied to children who trusted her absolutely. "How many children did you say?" 3, after ending. Charlotte's the oldest, maybe 8 or so. Then a boy around 6, and the youngest can't be more than 4. Martha studied his face with the careful attention of someone reading storm clouds. Why the sudden interest? No reason. He moved toward his study, that refuge of leather and whiskey and books he no longer read. "I'll take coffee in the morning, early." He did not sleep that night. Instead, he paced his study while wind rattled the windows. The memory of his mother's sacrifice haunted him. That winter they had nothing, the anonymous sack of flour that saved them. Now he had the power to be that stranger for someone else. He stopped pacing and stared out the window at stars that burned cold and distant above his prosperous land. 400 acres, cattle that numbered in the hundreds, a house that could shelter 20 people built for a family of three that never was. If he could help Emma Harrison without shaming her, without binding her with obligation or debt, he would. Not to erase his sins, nothing erased those, but perhaps to prove that hands which had taken 10 lives could still give something worth having. Before dawn, Ben rose with resolution hardening like frost in his chest. The kitchen was dark and cold when he entered. He did not bother lighting a lamp. He had lived in this house long enough to navigate it blind, and soldiers learned to move in darkness, to do necessary work when light made you a target. The largest wicker basket sat on a shelf above the pantry. Catherine's basket, the one she had used for trips to town, for gathering eggs, for filling with vegetables from a garden she never got to harvest. Ben pulled it down and began to fill it with the precision of a man following orders he had given himself. Eggs first, a dozen packed in straw, careful, so none would crack. He calculated as he worked. 4 people, 3 meals a day, eggs provided protein that growing children needed. A 10-pound sack of flour fresh from Brennan's store. White flour, not the cheap stuff cut with sawdust and chemicals. Bacon wrapped in butcher paper, thick slices from the best stock. 6 potatoes without eyes or soft spots. 2 cans of condensed milk. Dried apples. A small sack of sugar that cost more than it should, but would let those children taste sweetness. And 1 bottle of children's cough medicine. He had heard the youngest boy coughing through the cabin wall. He wrapped everything in clean cloth, tied it with twine, left no note. Nothing to identify the giver or create obligation. Just food. Just mercy in the form of calories and nutrition. The sky was still black when he saddled the gray. Stars faded at the edges as dawn approached somewhere beyond the mountains. His breath clouded white in the freezing air as he rode toward town through routes he had scouted over the previous 3 days. Cedar Ridge slept. Shops stood dark windows reflecting nothing. Ben guided the gray through back alleys he had never taken before approaching Emma Harrison's cabin from the rear, where fewer eyes might see. Her chimney showed no smoke. She would be sleeping still, conserving firewood, the way she conserved everything else, stretching every resource until it screamed. The thought tightened something in Ben's chest that felt dangerously close to rage at a world that let mothers starve, while men like him had more than they could use. He dismounted in silence, boots making no sound on frozen ground. Military training. Tracking skills learned hunting Kiowa. Movement refined through necessity and survival. He placed the basket on her doorstep and adjusted the cloth so wind would not disturb it. For a moment he stood there imagining her face when she opened the door. The shock, the relief, the tears of a mother who could feed her children something more than garbage. He imagined the weight lifting from her shoulders, even if just for a day, even if just for a meal. Then he retreated before light broke the horizon, before anyone could see, before mercy could become transaction. Back at his ranch, Ben unsaddled the gray and stood in the barn as dawn painted the sky golden pink. He felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not happiness. He had forgotten what happiness felt like. Not redemption. His sins were permanent as scars. Purpose, perhaps. For the first time in 5 years, an action that meant something beyond routine and survival. A choice that might make a difference in lives that mattered. He would do it again tomorrow, and the day after, for as long as they needed, not because it absolved him. Nothing could do that. But because it was what a man should do when he saw suffering he could ease. Emma Harrison woke before dawn as she always did. The cold had settled deep into her bones during the night, and she lay still for a moment, listening to her children's breathing in the darkness. Charlotte slept curled around Noah, keeping him warm. Thomas had kicked off his thin blanket again. Emma rose quietly and tucked it back around him, her fingers brushing his forehead. Still warm, not feverish. Thank God. She moved to the small stove and struck a match with numb fingers. The last of the kindling caught, and she fed it carefully, making each piece count. Today she would have to find work, any work. Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house sometimes needed help with laundry. The pay was poor, but poor was better than nothing. Emma opened the door to check the weather and stopped. A basket sat on her doorstep. She stared at it for a long moment, not comprehending. Then she knelt, pulled back the cloth with trembling hands. Eggs, a whole dozen packed in straw. Flour, more flour than she had seen in months. Bacon, real bacon thick sliced. Potatoes, milk, sugar. Emma pressed her hand to her mouth as tears spilled down her cheeks before she could stop them. Someone had left this. Someone knew they were starving. Someone cared enough to help. Mama? She turned to find Charlotte in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Mama, why are you crying? What's in that basket? Mom gathered herself, wiped her face, smiled through tears that would not stop. Breakfast, sweet girl. We're having real breakfast today. Real breakfast. Thomas appeared behind his sister, hair sticking up in all directions. With eggs. With eggs and bacon. Bacon. Noah came running, nearly tripping over his own feet in excitement. I want bacon, Mama. Can I have bacon? Emma laughed, a sound strange in her own ears. When had she last laughed? When had anything been funny or light or touched with joy instead of weighted with dread? You can all have bacon. Now help me bring this inside before it freezes. As the children carried the precious food indoors, Emma looked out at the empty street, looked for footprints in the thin snow, some sign of who had left this miracle. Nothing. The snow was smooth and undisturbed, as if the basket had materialized from air. She whispered to whoever might be listening, to wrong or stranger, or the cold morning itself. Thank you. Thank you. That first breakfast was the best meal they had eaten in 18 months. Emma fried eggs until the edges went crispy the way Thomas liked them. She made thick slices of bacon that filled the small cabin with a smell so good Noah kept sniffing the air and giggling with pure delight. Charlotte asked for more, and Emma's heart nearly broke with the simple joy of being able to say yes. More. They could have more. Emma ate too for the first time in days. The food sat strange in her shrunken stomach, but she forced herself to finish. She needed strength if she was going to figure out who had left the basket and how to repay them. After breakfast, she scrubbed the basket until it gleamed, folded the cloth with sharp creases, pressing it flat with her hands since she had no iron. Set it on the doorstep, clean and ready to return. The next morning, the basket was gone. In its place sat another one filled with different food. Fresh bread still warm from someone's oven. More eggs, a jar of honey golden as sunlight. Emma fell to her knees in the snow. Who are you? She whispered. Why are you doing this? But no answer came. Only the cold wind and the rising sun and the terrible, beautiful gift of another day where her children would not go hungry. Ben watched from the shadows of the alley, heart pounding in his chest. He had arrived just as Emma opened the door, had seen her face when she found the second basket. The disbelief, the gratitude, the tears. He should leave, should ride away before she spotted him. But he could not move, could not look away from her kneeling in the snow, whispering questions to empty air. She was beautiful. He had not noticed it the first night, too focused on her poverty and the children's hunger. But now, with dawnlight catching her honey-brown hair, with tears tracking down her cheeks, she was the most beautiful thing he had seen in 5 years. The thought hit him like a physical blow. He had not compared anyone to Catherine since she died, had not let himself look at women that way, had not wanted to. But Emma Harrison, kneeling in gratitude over eggs and bread, stirred something he thought had died with his wife. Emma turned her head and Ben pressed himself against the wall, breath coming fast and shallow. What was he doing? This was supposed to be charity, anonymous kindness, not whatever this feeling was creeping through his chest like warmth through frozen ground. He waited until she carried the basket inside. Then he fled. The days fell into a pattern. Ben woke before dawn and filled the basket. Each time he chose the route, carefully learning which alleys were empty, which paths kept him hidden. He became a ghost, appearing and disappearing before anyone could see. The basket always came back clean, scrubbed, and folded, ready for the next delivery. Then one morning, something new appeared. A wildflower tucked into the handle. Purple, impossible in February, Wyoming. She must have searched the creek banks for hours to find something growing against all odds. Ben pressed the flower between the pages of his Bible that night. A fragile gift from a woman he had never properly spoken to. Evidence that she saw him somehow, even through the anonymity, that she wanted to say thank you in the only way she could. The next week he found a note. The paper was rough, torn from an old book. The pencil letters were careful and precise. To my unknown friend, you have saved us. There are no words sufficient for such kindness. May God bless your generous heart, your grateful recipient. Ben read it 3 times, standing in his barn with early light slanting through gaps in the boards. His throat felt tight. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket where it rested against his heart. That evening, he sat at his workbench and carved a small wooden horse, cedar smooth grain that accepted the knife without fighting. He sanded it until the wood shone, imagining small hands holding it, a child's wonder at receiving something made just for him. He tucked it into the next basket nestled among the potatoes. Mama, Mama, look. Noah came running with the wooden horse clutched in his fist, eyes wide as moons. Someone made me a present, a real present. Emma took the horse from his hands and turned it over slowly. The craftsmanship was beautiful, every line smooth, every curve perfect. Someone had spent hours on this, hours of careful work to bring joy to a child they had never met. It's wonderful, sweetheart. Can I keep it? Please, Mama, can I? Of course you can keep it. It's yours. Noah hugged the horse to his chest like it was made of gold instead of wood. I'm going to name him Thunder because he runs fast like thunder. He galloped around the room making horse sounds while Emma stood with the basket in her hands, tears burning her eyes. Who was this person? This stranger who fed them, who carved toys for her children, who asked nothing in return. That night after the children slept, Emma wrote another note. My children speak of you in their prayers now. They call you the angel. You have given us more than food. You have given us hope. I wish I knew how to thank you properly. Please know that you are in my heart always. She tucked it in the basket before dawn, then watched from the window as the first light touched the eastern sky, waiting to see if the angel would come. Nothing. No one appeared, but when she checked at sunrise, the basket was gone, the note with it. Ben read her words by lamplight, alone in his study. You are in my heart always. He should stop. This was becoming something it should not be. He was a widower with ghosts. She was a struggling mother with 3 children. The gap between them was wider than the prairie, but he could not stop. He started including books in the baskets. He had noticed Charlotte at church, her eyes following the Reverend's Bible lips, moving as if trying to read from 3 pews back. He wrapped a primer in oilcloth and tucked it beneath the flower. A week later, he added a reader with simple stories. Then a book of poems because every child should know beauty alongside survival. Emma responded with drawings, crude sketches on scraps of paper clearly done by children's hands. A house with smoke curling from the chimney. Flowers in impossible colors. A family of stick figures holding hands. 4 of them. The mother in the center with arms stretched wide enough to hold everyone. Ben kept every drawing in his desk drawer. Some nights when loneliness pressed too heavy, he pulled them out and looked at them by candlelight, wondering what it might feel like to be part of that stick figure family. To be wanted instead of feared. To be seen as protector instead of killer. This is dangerous, he told himself. You're falling in love with a woman you've never spoken to. But the warning came too late. Somewhere between the first basket and watching her cry grateful tears over eggs, Ben Fletcher had started hoping again. Started imagining a future that held more than whiskey and regret. Sunday mornings he saw her at church. Emma sat in the back pew with her children scrubbed and neat despite threadbare clothes. She held her head high, accepted no pity, sang hymns in a voice clear as creek water. Ben sat near the front where wealthy ranchers were expected to sit, but he spent the entire service looking over his shoulder. Their eyes met once just for a moment. Something passed between them, something Ben could not name but felt like recognition deeper than sight. Emma looked away, first at a flush rising to her cheeks. She did not know it was him leaving the baskets, but she was praying for her unknown benefactor. He could see it in the way her lips moved during silent prayer, in the gratitude that softened her features, in the hope that had returned to eyes that had been hollow with despair. After service, Ben found reasons to linger. He talked to Reverend Clark about nothing important, shook hands with neighbors he barely knew, watched Emma gather her children and head toward home. You're staring, boss. Ben turned to find Sam Wilson, his foreman, watching him with knowing eyes. I don't know what you mean. Sure you don't. Widow Harrison's a fine-looking woman. Can't blame a man for noticing. I wasn't noticing. Then why have you been buying twice the supplies you need for the past month? Why do you ride into town before dawn every morning? Enough, Ben's voice came out harder than he intended. My business is my own. Sam raised his hands in mock surrender. Just saying, you ain't fooling nobody except maybe yourself. Ben walked away without answering, but Sam's words followed him home like dogs nipping at his heels. He should stop, before someone got hurt, before Emma learned that her angel was actually the man everyone whispered about, the killer rancher, the one who had beaten 3 men to death with his bare hands, the one whose violence was legend and whose grief had turned him into something barely human. But he could not stop, because for the first time in 5 years, Ben Fletcher woke up with a reason to keep breathing. And that reason had honey brown hair and 3 children who called him Angel when they prayed. Mr. Fletcher, you have a visitor. Martha's voice pulled Ben from his thoughts. He looked up from papers he had not been reading to find her in the doorway of his study. Who is it? Mrs. Victoria Ashford. She's waiting in the parlor. Ben suppressed a groan. Victoria Ashford was the wife of Ernest Ashford, owner of Cedar Ridge Bank. She was the richest woman for 50 miles, the biggest gossip in the territory, and she had been trying to marry him off to her daughter for 3 years. Tell her I'm busy. I tried. She says she'll wait. Some battles could not be avoided. Ben rose with a sigh that came from his bones. Victoria Ashford sat in his best chair like she owned it, teacup balanced on her knee. She was a handsome woman in her mid-40s, dressed in silk that must have cost a month of most people's wages. Benjamin, so good of you to see me. Mrs. Ashford, what brings you out this way? Can a neighbor pay a social call? She smiled, but her eyes were sharp as broken glass. Though I admit I've heard some concerning rumors. Ben kept his face neutral, a skill learned in war when showing emotion could get you killed. Rumors. About you and that Harrison woman. His blood went cold. How much did the town know? How long had people been watching? I don't know what you mean. People are talking, Benjamin. They say you've been buying strange supplies. Eggs and flour and such. More than one man could ever need. They say you've been leaving things at her door. People say a lot of things. Indeed they do. Victoria set down her teacup with deliberate care. I'm not here to judge. I'm here as a friend. A man of your standing involved with a woman like that could ruin you. A woman like what exactly? Poor, widowed, with 3 children she can barely feed. Victoria leaned forward, voice dropping to false intimacy. I know you have a generous heart, Benjamin. It's one of your finest qualities. But there are proper channels for charity. The church board, the Ladies' Aid Society. You don't need to involve yourself personally. Ben stood at conversation finished as far as he was concerned. I appreciate your concern, Mrs. Ashford, but I believe our visit is concluded. Benjamin, please. Martha will see you out. Victoria's face reddened, but she rose with dignity that came from a lifetime of getting her way through polite manipulation. At the door, she paused, delivering her parting shot with the precision of a trained duelist. Think about what I said. Your reputation is everything in a small town. Don't throw it away on sentiment. After she left, Ben stood at the window for a long time watching her carriage disappear down the road. Victoria was right about one thing. People were starting to notice. Soon the whispers would become open talk. Questions would be asked. Assumptions would be made. He should stop. End the baskets. Let the church board take over with their forms and questions and committees that move slower than winter ice. But he thought of Emma's face when she found his gifts, of Noah clutching thunder like it was precious as gold, of Charlotte's eyes lighting up when she opened a new book, of the note in his pocket. You are in my heart always. To hell with rumors, to hell with reputation, to hell with a town that watched families starve and did nothing until someone broke their unwritten rules about proper charity. Ben had lost everything once, his wife, his son, his belief in a world that made sense. He had nothing left to lose except this small, fragile hope that he might still be capable of doing good. And he was not ready to surrender that. Not yet. Maybe not ever. One morning in the 4th week, Ben arrived earlier than usual. The sky was still more black than gray stars fading reluctantly as dawn approached somewhere beyond sight. He placed the basket on Emma's doorstep and arranged the cloth just so making sure wind would not disturb the carefully packed contents. Then the door rattled. His heart jumped into his throat. He grabbed the basket, pulled it back, dove behind his wagon, just as the door opened and Emma stepped onto the threshold. She wore a nightgown and shawl, barefoot despite the cold. Her hair fell loose around her shoulders. She looked left, then right, squinting into the darkness as if she could will her unknown benefactor into visibility through sheer determination. Ben held his breath, pressed himself against the wagon wheel, felt ridiculous and exposed and terrified in equal measure. This close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the way her collarbones stood out too sharp, the trembling in her hands that might have been cold or hunger, or the weight of carrying everything alone. She stood there for a long moment, searching the darkness for answers it would not give. Then she bent and lifted something he had not seen. The basket from yesterday, which she had placed back on the step before sleeping, cleaned and ready. Her hands trembled as she pulled back the cloth on the new basket he had just set down seconds before. Even in dim light, he saw her face change, saw wonder and relief and something like grief all mixed together in an expression that would haunt him for the rest of his life. She pressed her hand to her heart. Tears slipped down her cheeks without sound. Her shoulders shook with the weight of relief she had been holding back for too long. Ben watched her cry silent tears of gratitude over eggs and flour and bacon. Watched her gather the basket close like it was precious as gold. Watched her struggle under burdens he could ease but never truly lift, because poverty was not just lack of food, but lack of choice, lack of power, lack of everything that made life feel like living instead of just not dying. She was not charity anymore, not an abstract good deed or a way to balance cosmic ledgers. She was Emma, a woman who worked herself ragged to keep her children fed, who taught them their letters by lamplight, who made threadbare clothes look neat through sheer force of will and determination. She was magnificent, and watching her cry over simple groceries made something crack open in Ben's chest that he had sealed shut 5 years ago when he buried his wife and son. Emma carried the basket inside, closing the door soft behind her. Ben stayed crouched behind his wagon until his legs cramped, making sure she would not come back out and find him there like some kind of stalker or thief. When he finally stood, the sky had lightened to gray. Birds started their morning songs. He rode home as the sun rose and everything looked different. The fear he had been holding that his help might shame her, that he was overstepping, that this was just duty burned away like morning fog. He was not helping anymore out of Christian obligation or childhood memory or guilt about 10 dead men. Somewhere between the first basket and watching her cry grateful tears in her doorway, Ben Fletcher had fallen completely in love with Emma Harrison. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing he had let himself feel in years. Like coming back to life after being dead so long, he forgot what breathing felt like. That evening, he sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of blood and gold. Spring was coming slowly, ice breaking, the world beginning to wake from winter sleep. Maybe hearts could thaw too. Maybe a lonely rancher and a struggling widow could find warmth in each other. Maybe love grew best in the spaces between giving and receiving, in the silent language of baskets left and gratitude returned. Ben pulled out Emma's note and read it again by fading light. May God bless your generous heart. He hoped God would forgive him for wanting more than blessing. He wanted her voice, her laughter, her hand in his. He wanted those children running through his empty halls, filling rooms with noise and life. He wanted to build the family he had never let himself imagine, with a woman who had taught him that true wealth had nothing to do with land or cattle or money in banks. But wanting and having were different countries separated by chasms of fear and propriety, and the simple fact that Emma did not know who he was, did not know that her angel was actually the killer rancher everyone whispered about, the man who had buried 3 people with his bare hands, the man whose violence was legend and whose past was soaked in blood. When she learned the truth, would she still want him, or would she do what any sensible woman would do, and protect her children from a man who knew 10 different ways to kill and had used all of them? The basket sat on Ben's kitchen table like an accusation. 4 in the morning, lamp burning low, coffee going cold in his cup. He had been staring at it for an hour, unable to move, unable to think past the fear coiling in his gut like a rattlesnake preparing to strike. Inside that basket, returned clean as always, was a note. He had not read it yet, had not touched it, because once he read it, everything would change. The comfortable distance he had maintained, the safety of anonymity, the ability to help without consequence, all of it would end. His hands shook as he reached for the folded paper tucked into the handle where yesterday a wildflower had been. The handwriting was the same as previous notes, careful pencil on rough paper torn from a book spine. But this time his name appeared in the first line. That Sunday at church, Emma watched Benjamin Fletcher more carefully than before, the way his eyes found her across the congregation. The calluses on his hands when he shook the Reverend's hand, craftsman's hands like those that had carved thunder. The timing of his arrivals in town always before dawn. Small details assembled into certainty. The wealthy rancher with more food than he could use. The man everyone whispered about, but who looked at her children with something like longing. She knew. I know who you are now. I know what people say. I know what you've done. But I also know what you're doing for us. Thank you, Benjamin. Emma. The world tilted. Ben read the words again, then a third time, searching for condemnation or fear, or the reasonable rejection any woman should feel toward a man with his history. But all he found was gratitude, and his name, and hers. She knew. Somehow Emma had learned that her anonymous angel was actually Benjamin Fletcher, the wealthy rancher everyone whispered about. The killer. The widower who had gone mad with grief and beaten 3 men to death in an abandoned line shack. The man whose violence was legend and whose darkness ran deep as mineshaft. And she was thanking him. Ben stood abruptly, chair scraping against wood floor loud in the pre-dawn silence. He paced to the window and back-trapped energy seeking outlet. Every instinct screamed to run, saddle the gray and ride to Cheyenne or Denver or San Francisco. Disappear before Emma's gratitude turned to fear, before she realized what a mistake it was to let a man like him anywhere near her children. But running solved nothing. He had learned that in war. You could run from Kiowa warriors or cavalry charges or your own cowardice, but eventually the thing you fled caught up. Better to face it standing than crouched in some ditch waiting for inevitability. Martha found him still pacing when she arrived to start breakfast. Lord have mercy, Ben. You look like you've seen a ghost. Maybe I have. He handed her the note without explanation. She read it quickly, eyes widening. She knows it's you. Apparently. What are you going to do? I don't know. Martha set the note on the table with the care of someone handling explosives. You could stop, leave one last basket with a note saying circumstances have changed. She'd understand. Would she? Or you could do what you should have done weeks ago, talk to her, like a man instead of a ghost. The suggestion landed like a punch. Talk to Emma, face to face, no more hiding behind darkness and anonymous gifts. No more pretending he was just a charitable stranger instead of a lonely man falling in love. She'd refuse me. Maybe, or maybe she'd surprise you. I'm not what she needs, Martha. I'm broken in ways that don't heal. So is she, widowed, poor, starving. You think she's whole? Martha's voice gentled. Maybe broken people fit together better than whole ones. Maybe the cracks let the light through. Ben wanted to believe that. Wanted to imagine that 2 people damaged by loss could build something stronger than either could alone. But wanting did not make it true. He picked up the note again, studying Emma's handwriting. The way she formed his name with deliberate care. The signature, just Emma, as if that one word contained everything necessary. I'll think about it. Don't think too long. Woman like that won't wait forever. After Martha left to start her morning work, Ben sat alone with his coffee and his fear in Emma's note. The basket needed filling. Dawn was coming. Soon it would be time to ride into town and leave supplies on her doorstep like he had every morning for a month. But this time would be different. This time she knew who he was, and he needed to decide whether to disappear like smoke or step into the light and risk everything on the chance that broken could be enough. He began packing the basket with hands that moved automatic from routine. Eggs, flour, bacon. The same supplies that had sustained her family through February's worst cold. But this time he added something new, a note of his own. Emma, I understand if you want me to stop. If knowing who I am changes things, I will disappear if that's what you need. But if you're willing, I'd like to talk. Properly. Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. If you're outside when I arrive, I'll know you're willing to meet. If not, I'll leave the basket and never return. The choice is yours. Ben. He tied the note to the basket handle and rode toward town through darkness that felt thicker than usual. Heavier with possibility and dread in equal measure. The delivery went as it always did. Silent approach. Basket placed with care. Quick retreat before dawn. But this time felt different. This time he was not just leaving food. He was extending an invitation that could change everything or end it completely. Emma found the basket at sunrise and read Ben's note with hands that would not stop shaking. He wanted to meet, face to face. No more hiding, no more pretending. Tomorrow at 6 in the morning. Be outside if she agreed. Stay inside if she refused. A simple choice that felt anything but simple. Charlotte appeared in the doorway, hair mussed from sleep. "Mama, did the angel come again?" "Yes, sweet girl. He came." "What did he bring?" Emma looked at the basket full of food, then at the note in her hand. A question. All day she wrestled with her answer. Part of her wanted to stay inside tomorrow, to keep the comfortable distance of anonymous charity. It was safer not knowing, safer not facing the man everyone called killer. But another part, the part that had survived Robert's death and 18 months of poverty, wanted to meet him. Wanted to look into the eyes of someone who had seen her at her lowest and helped anyway. Who had carved toys for children he had never met. Who had restored her hope when she thought it was gone forever. By evening, she had decided. The next morning, Emma woke at 5:30 and dressed in her best clothes. The dress was still patched in places, still showed every mend and repair, but it was clean and she wore it with as much dignity as silk and lace. She combed her hair until it shone, pinched her cheeks for color, took a breath deep enough to hurt. At 5:55, she stepped outside into cold dawn air and waited. Ben saw her from 100 yards away. Standing on her porch in a faded blue dress, arms wrapped around herself against the cold chin, lifted like she was facing execution instead of conversation. She had come. She was willing to meet. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack ribs. Every instinct screamed to turn the horse and flee. But he had not survived war and grief and 5 years of guilt by giving in to fear. He dismounted and approached on foot, leading the gray, removed his hat, kept his hands visible, and movements slow like he was approaching a wild animal that might bolt. "Mrs. Harrison." "Mr. Fletcher." Silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. They stood 10 feet apart, studying each other in the gray light before sunrise. Emma saw a tall man gone lean from work and grief hair, black shot through with premature silver at the temples, a scar running from jaw to collarbone. Eyes that had seen too much and hands that bore calluses from labor and violence both. Ben saw a woman barely holding on, thin from hunger, but standing straight, hair the color of honey, in weak light eyes green as creek water in spring. Beautiful not despite her poverty, but because of how she wore it with dignity instead of shame. "I imagine you have questions," Ben said finally. "A few. I'll answer anything you want to know." "Why wow? Why what? Why help us? Why the baskets? Why me?" The question cut straight to bone. Ben looked away, searching for words adequate to explain guilt and grief, and the desperate need to prove that hands which had killed could also give life. "Because I couldn't save my family. But maybe I could save yours." Emma studied him with the careful attention of someone reading a map in dim light. "I heard what happened to your wife. I'm sure you heard a lot of things. I heard you killed the men who did it. That's true. Did it help the revenge?" No one had ever asked him that. They assumed, they judged, they whispered, but no one asked whether vengeance had accomplished anything beyond adding weight to a soul already carrying too much. No, it didn't bring them back, didn't ease the pain, just added more blood to my hands. Then why do it? Because I needed them to hurt like I was hurting. Because I was angry at what's on in the world and myself. Because I didn't know what else to do and with all that rage except turn it outward and destroy the things that destroyed me. And now I'm just tired. Tired of being angry. Tired of being alone. Tired of waking up every morning wondering why I'm still breathing when they're not. Emma stepped closer, close enough that he could see gold flecks in her green eyes, smell soap and bread, and something indefinable that was just her. "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Fletcher. Maybe you should be. I've killed 10 men. In war and in defense of your family. That's not the same as murder. Isn't it? No, murder is killing for gain or pleasure. You killed to survive and to protect. That's what soldiers do. What fathers do. what any man would do if he loved someone enough. The words settled over him like absolution he did not deserve but desperately wanted. Emma saw past the violence to the motive, saw the difference between a killer and a man forced to kill. No one had given him that grace before. Not the town, not himself. "You're kinder than I deserve, Mrs. Harrison." Maybe, or maybe I see someone trying to be better than his worst moment. God, she was beautiful. Not just her face, but the way she thought, the way she refused to accept easy answers or simple judgments. The way she looked at a broken man and saw a possibility instead of just fractures. "I should go. Your children will wake soon and wonder where you are." "Wait," Emma touched his arm. First physical contact. Her hands small and work roughened against his sleeve. Electric current ran from point of contact straight to his chest. "I don't want you to stop. The baskets. I need them. We need them." "I know. But I also don't want charity built on lies. If you're going to help us, I want to know you. Really know you." "What are you proposing?" "Have coffee with me tomorrow morning and the day after. Get to know each other properly instead of through notes and gifts. And then we'll see where it leads. No promises, no obligations, just two people talking." Ben's heart raced. She was offering him something precious. Not just coffee, but the chance to be known, to be seen as more than the sum of his sins. "I'd like that, Emma." Her name felt strange in his mouth, intimate, like crossing a threshold he could not uncross. "Good, tomorrow at 6. I'll be here." She smiled, then a real smile that reached her eyes and made her whole face transform from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. "I'll have coffee ready." Ben rode home in a daze, barely seeing the landscape around him. Emma had not rejected him, had not feared him, had offered friendship, maybe more, despite knowing everything the town whispered. For the first time in 5 years, the future held something besides routine and regret. It held possibility. It held hope. It held a woman who might see past his darkness to whatever light remained. While Ben rode toward his ranch with hope kindling in his chest, other forces were moving in Cedar Ridge. Forces that would test whether that hope could survive the world's determination to crush anything fragile. In the elegant parlor of the Ashford mansion, Victoria sat with her husband, Ernest, bank president, and one of the wealthiest men in Wyoming territory. "The Fletcher situation is escalating," Victoria said, pouring tea with hands steady from practice. Ernest barely looked up from his newspaper. "Let it, not our concern." "It should be. If Benjamin Fletcher marries that Harrison woman, there are implications." Now she had his attention. Ernest set down the paper and looked at his wife with the sharp focus he usually reserved for loan applications and business deals. "What kind of implications?" "His land." Ernest leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. He had built his fortune on understanding leverage and opportunity, on seeing angles others missed. "Explain." "Fletcher has no heir, no family. If he dies, who inherits the ranch?" "No one. It reverts to the territory, then goes to auction." "Exactly. But if he marries and adopts those children, they inherit everything. 400 acres of prime grazing land that we've been trying to acquire for years. And once he has legal heirs, we lose our chance." Victoria nodded, satisfied that her husband was finally paying attention. "Unless we prevent the marriage, or better use it against him." "How?" "We question his fitness, his violence, his past. Make the town believe Benjamin Fletcher is dangerous. When he becomes desperate to prove otherwise, we offer a deal." "What kind of deal?" "He signs over land rights in exchange for the town's approval, for the right to marry without judgment, for his new family to be accepted." Ernest stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back, mind working through possibilities and profits. "It could work, but we'd need legal pressure, something official to make him vulnerable." "I've been thinking about that. The children. If we question whether they're safe with him, whether this rushed courtship is really about protecting them or using them, we could force a custody evaluation." "And who would oversee such an evaluation?" Victoria's smile turned cold. "Judge Bartlett owes you several favors, doesn't he?" Ernest turned, matching his wife's smile with one equally predatory. "Several large favors, yes." They understood each other perfectly. Marriage built not on love, but on mutual ambition and the shared understanding that power mattered more than sentiment. They made an effective team, Victoria controlling the social landscape, Ernest controlling the economic. Together, they could apply pressure from multiple directions until even a man as stubborn as Benjamin Fletcher broke. I'll speak with Hamilton, Ernest said. Say what legal mechanisms exist for questioning custody. You work the social angle. Make sure everyone in town knows about Fletcher's violence, his instability, the danger he might pose. Consider it done. And Victoria, Ernest paused at the door. Don't underestimate Fletcher. He's killed before. Push too hard, he might kill again. All the better. If he acts out, it proves our point. Either way, we win. The next morning, Ben arrived at Emma's cabin at precisely 6 o'clock. She was waiting with coffee, already poured steam rising from chipped cups that had seen better days. They sat at her crate table and talked. Awkwardly at first, like strangers forced together at a funeral. But gradually the stiffness eased. Ben told her about Catherine. Not just her death, but what she had been like alive. Her laugh, her garden, the way she hummed while cooking, the dreams they had shared for the ranch and the family they would build. Emma listened without judgment, letting him speak grief he had kept locked inside for years. Then she told him about Robert, about the secret money sent to his mother back east, about feeling betrayed even as she mourned, about the terrible anger that came with grief, the rage at being left alone with children and debts and no way forward. I blamed him for a long time, Emma admitted, for dying, for lying, for choosing his mother over his wife and children. It felt like he cared more about her approval than our survival. That's not fair to you, Ben said. A husband's first duty is to his wife and children. I know, but knowing doesn't stop the feeling. They understood each other's anger. Both had loved people who left. Both carried resentment alongside grief. Both were trying to figure out how to live in the after, how to build something new when the old was ashes. By the third morning, the children joined them for breakfast. Charlotte asked Ben about his ranch, eyes wide at descriptions of cattle and horses and land that stretched to the horizon. Thomas asked quiet questions about ranching work, absorbing information like a student taking notes. Noah mostly showed off Thunder, making the wooden horse gallop across the table while explaining its various adventures. Ben found himself laughing, actually laughing. The sound felt rusty from disuse, but good, like muscles remembering their purpose after long atrophy. After the children went outside to play, Emma turned serious. What are we doing, Ben? I don't know, but I don't want to stop. Neither do I, but people are talking more than ever. If you keep coming here, if we keep this up, the talk will get worse. Let them talk. It's different for you. You're a man. Your reputation survives gossip. Mine doesn't. Ben reached across the table and took her hand. First deliberate touch, palm to palm, calluses meeting calluses. Then we make it official. We stop sneaking around and court properly. Openly. So everyone knows my intentions are honorable. Ben, we've known each other less than 2 weeks. I've been watching you for 2 months. I know you're strong, smart, a good mother. I know you don't give up when things get hard. I know you make your children laugh even when you're falling apart. I know enough. That's not love. That's observation. Maybe it could become love, given time. Emma looked at him with those green eyes that saw too much and missed nothing. Ask me again in a month. If you still feel the same, I'll give you an answer. Deal. They shook on it like business partners instead of potential lovers, but the touch lingered longer than necessary, and the air between them felt charged with possibility. That afternoon, everything changed. A knock came at Emma's door, while the children napped and she was mending torn clothes by weak sunlight. She opened it to find Howard Pierce, her landlord, standing on the porch with an expression that mixed business with barely concealed pleasure. Mrs. Harrison. Mr. Pierce, I'm afraid I have some unfortunate news. Your rent is 3 months behind. I know. I've been trying to catch up. Mrs. Patterson said she might have laundry work next week and I could earn enough to make a payment. I'm not interested in partial payments anymore. I need the full amount. $90. You have 1 week. Emma's vision swam. $90 might as well be 90,000. Please, I have children. Where would we go? That's not my concern. 1 week, Mrs. Harrison. After that, I'll have the sheriff remove you if necessary. He tipped his hat with mock politeness and walked away, leaving Emma standing in her doorway, with a world that had just collapsed around her. Charlotte emerged from the bedroom, sleep-mussed and worried. "Mama, what's wrong?" "Nothing, sweet girl. Everything's fine." The lie tasted bitter. Nothing was fine. In 7 days, they would be homeless. Emma had survived hunger and cold and loneliness. But this felt different, final, like standing at the edge of a cliff with nowhere to go but down. That evening, she rode a borrowed horse to Ben's ranch, not to ask for money. She had too much pride for that, but to warn him, to tell him that whatever they were building together was about to become impossible because she and her children would be scattered to wherever charity could find room. Martha answered the door with surprise and concern mixing on her weathered face. "Mrs. Harrison, is everything all right? I need to speak with Mr. Fletcher. Is he available?" Ben appeared before Martha could answer, taking in Emma's pale face and trembling hands with alarm that went straight to action. "What happened? Can we talk privately?" They walked to the porch where evening light painted everything gold and red beautiful in a way that made Emma's news feel even worse by contrast. "Pierce gave me an eviction notice. 1 week to pay $90 or we're out." "I'll pay it." "No. Emma, I have the money. It's nothing to me. It's everything to me. If you pay it, the whole town will say I'm selling myself to you, that I'm using my children as leverage to trap a wealthy man. I don't care what they say. I do, for my children's sake. They have to live here, go to school here, grow up here. What happens when everyone thinks their mother is a whore?" The word hung between them, ugly and brutal. Ben's hands clenched into fists, violence rising automatic before he forced it down. "Then what do you want me to do? Watch you lose your home? I want you to let me handle it. I'll find work. I'll earn the money." "In 1 week, Emma, be realistic." "I'm always realistic. I don't have the luxury of anything else." Her voice cracked and tears started falling before she could stop them. Ben pulled her into his arms without thinking, just instinct and need to comfort overwhelming every other consideration. She resisted for half a second, then collapsed against him, sobbing into his shirt while he held her and wished violence could solve this the way it solved problems in war. But you could not shoot poverty, could not stab eviction notices, could not beat homelessness to death with your bare hands. "I'm going to pay your rent," Ben said quietly. "Not as charity, as a loan. You pay me back however you can. Take years if you need to." "I can't." "You can and you will. I'm not letting you and those children end up on the street. Not when I can prevent it." Emma pulled back enough to look at him through tear-blurred eyes. "Why do you care so much, Obi?" "Because you make me want to be better than I am. Because watching you fight for your children reminds me what's worth fighting for. Because I can't save Catherine and Michael, but maybe I can save you. I don't need saving, Ben. I need a partner. Then be my partner. Let me help you. And when you're stable, help me back. Help me remember how to live instead of just surviving. Help me be something other than a killer with a guilty conscience." She touched his face rough palm against rougher stubble, and something passed between them that felt like understanding deeper than words. "Okay, pay the rent, but I will pay you back, every cent, even if it takes years. I'll hold you to that." They stood close in the fading light, foreheads nearly touching, breathing the same air until Martha's discreet cough from the doorway reminded them they were not alone in the world even when it felt that way. The next morning, Ben rode to Pierce's office with cash and cold fury in equal measure. Pierce counted the money with a smirk that made Ben's hands itch for his throat. $90. Generous of you, Fletcher. "It's a loan to Mrs. Harrison. She'll pay me back." "Of course she will. Everyone knows you're just helping." The sarcasm dripped like poison. Ben's hand shot out faster than Pierce could react, grabbing the man's collar and dragging him half across the desk. "Listen carefully. You will speak about Mrs. Harrison with respect. You will not spread rumors or innuendo. You will treat her like the lady she is. Do you understand?" Pierce paled, suddenly remembering that the man choking him had killed 3 people with these same hands. "I understand." "Good." Ben released him and dropped the money on the desk, then walked out before violence could escalate beyond threats. But Pierce sat there rubbing his throat with eyes full of calculation and hate. Men like Fletcher thought money and muscle solved everything. They never considered that information could be a weapon sharper than any blade. Within an hour, Pierce sent word to Ernest Ashford. The message was simple. Fletcher paid the widow's rent, threatened violence when questioned, acting unstable, dangerous. Everything Ashford needed to proceed with the next phase of his plan. 2 days later, official documents arrived at Ben's ranch, legal papers bearing the territorial seal and Judge Hamilton Bartlett's signature. Ben read them twice, each word landing like a body blow. Catherine's parents, who he had not spoken to since her funeral, were claiming the ranch as part of her estate, claiming that Ben had no right to remarry or adopt children while property ownership was disputed, claiming his violent tendencies made him unfit to manage Catherine's legacy. Court date in 3 weeks. If he lost everything, gone. The ranch, his livelihood, his ability to offer Emma and her children anything resembling security. He rode to Emma's cabin with the papers in hand and face carved from stone. She read them carefully, intelligence sharpening her features as she processed the legal language and its implications. This is Ernest Ashford's work. Catherine's parents filed it. At Ashford's direction, he's using them, probably promised them money to challenge you. Ben looked at her with something like awe. She saw through the legal facade to the manipulation beneath faster than he had. How do you know? Because powerful men always use others as weapons. Robert's mother did the same thing. Claimed he owed her money. Took everything after he died, using debts I never knew existed. She set the papers down with careful control, but her hands shook. What will you do? Fight. I'm not losing the ranch. I can't. It's just land, Ben. No, it's what I built for Catherine and Michael. It's all I have left of them. If I lose it, I have nothing to offer you and the children. No way to protect you. No future worth having. Emma stood and cupped his face in both hands, making him look at her instead of the papers threatening his world. I don't need a ranch. I need you. If you lose everything, we'll figure it out together. We'll build something new. You'd still marry me even if I'm poor. I was already poor when I started falling in love with you. What's one more poor person? Ben stopped breathing. Time stopped. The world reduced to Emma's green eyes and the words that had just changed everything. You love me. She blushed, realizing what she had confessed. Maybe, a little. Is that allowed? He kissed her then, deep and desperate and full of 5 years of loneliness, finally finding harbor. She kissed him back with equal intensity, fingers tangling in his hair, body pressed against his like she was drowning, and he was air. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Ben rested his forehead against hers. Marry me. Now, today, before the court case. Before anything else can go wrong. Ben, we agreed to wait a month. I know, but if this case goes badly, if I lose everything, I want you as my wife first. I want the children legally mine. I want us to be a family, even if we end up with nothing but each other. Emma searched his face and found only sincerity and need and love, still learning how to name itself. Okay. Yes, I'll marry you. Today, if Reverend Clark will do it. Ben actually laughed, pulling her close and spinning her once like they were dancing instead of standing in a rundown cabin planning a hasty wedding. When you've waited 5 years for happiness, you don't waste time. That afternoon, they stood before Reverend Clark in the small Cedar Ridge church. No flowers, no fancy dress, just Ben in his Sunday suit and Emma in her best patched dress with 3 confused but happy children as witnesses. Martha cried. Sam Wilson grinned. Reverend Clark smiled with genuine warmth as he pronounced words that made them husband and wife under law and God both. Ben kissed Emma like she was breath itself. Charlotte clapped. Thomas smiled shy and uncertain. Noah shouted with joy that echoed off the rafters. They were a family. Official, legal, real. Whatever came next, they would face it together. But what came next arrived faster than any of them expected. The church door opened, and Judge Hamilton Bartlett walked in with Sheriff Davis and 2 deputies. The joy drained from the room like water from a broken cup. Mr. Fletcher, Mrs. Fletcher, Judge nodded with false courtesy. Congratulations on your marriage. Thank you, Judge. I'm afraid I have some unfortunate business. The court case regarding your property has been expedited due to your sudden marriage. What? Why, Co? Catherine's estate representatives claim you married specifically to circumvent inheritance law, that you're using the children as pawns in a property dispute. That's absurd. Perhaps, but I'm required to investigate. Furthermore, concerns have been raised about the children's welfare. Emma's blood went cold. Everything in her screamed danger. What concerns? That they're being used in a property dispute, that their safety may be at risk in a household with a documented history of violence. Ben stepped forward, and Sheriff Davis's hand moved to his gun-unconscious reflex to perceive threat. You're questioning my ability to care for them. I'm not. The court is. As of now, I'm ordering temporary custody evaluation. The children will remain in neutral third-party care until the hearing. Emma's world tilted and fell. No, you can't take them. I can and must, for their protection. Protection from what? From having enough food, from being loved. From finally having a father who cares about them. From this, Judge gestured to Ben, from a man with a violent history, from a rushed marriage that may be motivated by greed rather than their welfare. Ben's fist clenched. Every muscle in his body coiled for violence. 5 years of control, 5 years of forcing himself to be civilized, all of it hovering on a razor edge. Emma sensed it and touched his arm, voice urgent and low. Ben, don't give them what they want. Don't prove their point. Sheriff Davis spoke carefully, hand still near his gun. The children will be placed temporarily with Victoria Ashford, a respectable household during the evaluation period. Victoria Ashford, the woman who had started all this with her gossip and manipulation. Now she would have Emma's children in her care and her control as leverage and punishment both. Ben understood immediately. This was Ernest's plan. Use Victoria for social pressure. Use the judge for legal pressure. Box them in from every side until they had no choice but to surrender. How long? Emma's voice came out broken. Until the hearing, 2 weeks maximum. 2 weeks, 14 days, 336 hours that her children would be in the care of a woman who despised them and everything they represented. Deputies approached the children, who had been watching with growing fear. Charlotte backed away, grabbing her brothers. Mama, Emma knelt, tears streaming, pulling all 3 children into her arms. Listen to me, all of you. This is temporary. Papa Ben and I will get you back. I promise. I promise. No, Noah clung to her neck. I want to stay with you. Thomas was silent, but his eyes were wide with the kind of fear that came from understanding more than a 6-year-old should. Ben knelt too, voice steady, despite the rage and grief tearing him apart inside. You're my children now. Legally. Forever. No one can change that. Be brave. Take care of each other. We will come for you. The deputies gently but firmly separated the children from their parents. Charlotte cried silently. Thomas held Noah, who was screaming now, high-pitched wails of betrayal and confusion. Emma collapsed as they were led away, sobs tearing from her throat in sounds that barely resembled human. Ben caught her, held her, watched his children disappear through the church door into a wagon that would take them to the Ashford mansion. To Victoria's care. To being used as weapons against the people who loved them most. The worst sound Ben had ever heard. Worse than gunfire. Worse than dying soldiers. Worse than Catherine's last rattling breath. His children screaming for him while he stood powerless to stop it. Martha and Sam tried to offer comfort, but there was no comfort to give. Reverend Clark stood helpless, trapped between law and morality. Judge Bartlett left without another word, duty discharged, conscience apparently clear. After everyone else left, Ben and Emma remained in the empty church. Emma wept until she had no tears left. Ben sat rigid, every muscle locked, fighting the violence that roared through him like wildfire. I'll kill them, he said finally. Voice flat, dead. I'll kill Pierce and Ashford and Bartlett, all of them. No. Emma grabbed his face, made him look at her. No, Ben. Those children need you alive and free, not dead or in prison. They took our children. I know, and we'll get them back, legally, through the system. The system is broken. The system serves men like Ashford. Maybe, but if you kill them, you prove every terrible thing they've said about you. You prove you're the monster in their story. Martha spoke from the doorway where she had been waiting, giving them privacy. She's right, Ben. Violence will only make this worse. You have to be smart. Strategic. Fight them in court, not in the street. Ben wanted to argue, wanted to saddle his horse and ride to the Ashford mansion with gun in hand, wanted to take his children back by force and damn the consequences. But Emma's hands on his face kept him anchored. Her eyes kept him human. Her faith that he could be better than his worst impulses kept him from becoming the thing everyone feared. Okay, he said, voice rough. We do it legal. We fight them in court. But if they hurt one hair on those children's heads, then all bets are off. Emma nodded, understanding and accepting. Some lines once crossed erased all rules. Some threats required absolute response. They left the church as the sun set, married less than 2 hours, and already tested in ways that would break most couples. But they walked hand in hand, united in purpose. Get their children back. Destroy the people who had taken them. Build a life worth living on the ashes of everything that tried to stop them. War had been declared. Not with guns, but with lawyers and judges and legal manipulation. And Ben Fletcher, veteran of the Indian Wars and survivor of grief that should have killed him, was going to show Cedar Ridge what happened when you threatened his family. He had killed for revenge before. This time he would win for love, and nothing would stop him. The Ashford mansion sat on the hill overlooking Cedar Ridge like a monument to wealth and power. 3 stories of whitewashed wood and glass windows that caught the sun and threw it back in blinding flashes. Inside those walls, Charlotte Harrison tried not to let fear show on her 8-year-old face. They had been separated the first night. 3 rooms on the 3rd floor, small and sparse, and nothing like the warm, crowded cabin where they used to sleep close enough to hear each other breathe. Charlotte lay awake listening for Thomas and Noah through walls that were too thick, too solid, built to keep people apart instead of together. Victoria Ashford had smiled when she showed them their quarters, a smile that never touched her eyes cold as creek water in January. You'll stay here until your mother and that man prove they're fit. House rules are simple. No noise, no running, no leaving your rooms without permission. Charlotte wanted to say that Ben was not that man he was. Papa Ben, he was family. But something in Victoria's face warned her that contradicting would make things worse. So she nodded and took Noah's hand and tried to be brave like Mama taught her. By the 3rd day, Noah stopped eating, said his throat hurt. Charlotte told Victoria but received only dismissal. He's fine, just being fussy because he's in a strange place. No, he's really sick. He needs medicine. Don't contradict me, child. I know better than you. Charlotte bit her tongue hard enough to taste copper, but Noah got worse. Fever climbing, skin going pale. The cough that had been minor becoming deep and wet, pulling from his chest in sounds that scared her. She tried again on the 4th day. Please, Mrs. Ashford, Noah needs a doctor. He needs discipline. Crying for attention won't work here. He's not crying for attention. He's sick. Victoria's hand moved faster than Charlotte could dodge. The slap echoed in the big house, sharp and cruel. Charlotte's cheek burned, but she refused to cry, refused to give this woman the satisfaction. You will speak when spoken to and not before. Do you understand? Charlotte nodded, hand pressed to her stinging face, hatred blooming in her chest like poison flowers. That night, she whispered to Thomas through the thin wall between their rooms. Noah's getting worse. We have to tell someone. Who? They don't listen to us. Papa Ben would listen. Papa Ben can't get to us, not without breaking the law. Silence filled with the sound of Noah coughing in the next room, wet and desperate. Maybe that's okay, Charlotte said finally. Maybe some laws deserve to be broken. On the 5th morning, Noah collapsed during breakfast. Just fell from his chair like a puppet with cut strings, body hitting the floor with a sound that made Charlotte scream. Victoria stood frozen, face draining of color, as she realized this was real. This was serious. This could ruin everything if the child died in her care. Get a doctor, Charlotte screamed. Get a doctor now. I'll send for the physician. Now, not later now. But Victoria hesitated because a doctor would see that Noah had been neglected, would see that this protective care was actually endangerment, would testify that Victoria Ashford had let a child sicken nearly to death because she cared more about winning than about life. She could lose control, lose the leverage, lose everything. So she stalled. I'll send a servant to fetch him. Charlotte saw the calculation in Victoria's eyes. saw the moment when concern for reputation outweighed concern for a 4-year-old boy burning with fever. Something snapped inside her. She ran to the window and threw it open, cold air rushing in. Before Victoria could stop her, Charlotte leaned out and screamed into the street with every ounce of air in her lungs. "Help, my brother's dying. Someone get Papa Ben. Help us," her voice carried across the morning quiet of Cedar Ridge. Heads turned, windows opened. People stopped in the street and looked up at the Ashford mansion where a child was screaming for help. Victoria grabbed Charlotte and yanked her back from the window, but it was too late. The damage was done. The secret was out. 5 miles away at the Fletcher Ranch, Sam Wilson heard the story from a neighbor who had been in town. He saddled his horse and rode harder than he had since the war arriving at the ranch, with news that made Ben's blood turn to ice. "Boss, the boy Noah, he's sick, bad sick. Someone heard Charlotte screaming from the Ashford house." Ben did not wait, did not think, did not consider consequences or laws or anything, except that his son was dying and needed him. He grabbed his rifle from pure instinct, then caught himself and put it back. Violence would not help here, but his hands would. Emia appeared in the doorway, face pale but set with determination that matched his own. "I'm coming with you." "Emma, if this goes wrong, they could arrest me." "Then they arrest us both. Those are our children. We go together." No time to argue. They rode together through the cold morning toward Cedar Ridge, toward the mansion on the hill, toward whatever waited there. The Ashford mansion door was solid oak built to impress and intimidate. Ben hit it with his shoulder and it exploded inward, lock tearing from wood hinges, screaming. Victoria stood in the foyer and screamed herself high-pitched and useless. Ben crossed the marble floor in 3 strides and grabbed her by the shoulders, lifting her until her feet barely touched ground. "Where is my son?" "Upstairs, but you can't just break in here. This is trespassing. I'll have you arrested." "Where?" His voice dropped to something quiet and terrible. The voice of a man who had killed before and would kill again if pressed far enough. Victoria saw her death in his eyes and stopped fighting. "Third door on the left." Ben released her and took the stairs 4 at a time. Emma followed close while Victoria collapsed against the wall, all her power and control stripped away by raw fear. The room was small and cold, and Noah lay on the bed unconscious. Fever flushed his small face red. His breathing came shallow and fast, chest hitching with effort. Charlotte and Thomas knelt beside him, Charlotte pressing a damp cloth to his forehead with hands that shook. "Papa Ben!" Charlotte threw herself at him, and he caught her, held her tight while his heart tried to break free of his chest. "I knew you'd come. I told them you had come for us." Ben set her down gently and moved to the bed, touched Noah's forehead and felt heat that should not exist in living flesh. Listened to breathing that rattled wet in small lungs. "How long has he been like this?" "Since this morning, but he's been sick for days." She wouldn't get a doctor. Rage flooded through Ben, so pure and hot, it felt clean. Victoria Ashford had let his son suffer because she cared more about appearances than life. Had let Noah sicken toward death because admitting she was wrong mattered more than a child's survival. Emma appeared in the doorway with a medical bag she had found somewhere in the house. She moved to Noah with the competence of someone who had nursed sick children before checking his breathing, his pulse, his color. "Pneumonia, early stage but dangerous. He needs medicine and rest." "Can we move him?" "We have to. He'll die if he stays here." Ben wrapped Noah in blankets and lifted him like he weighed nothing. The boy barely stirred, lost in fever dreams that made him mutter and twist. "I've got you, son. Papa's got you." Thomas grabbed Thunder from the bedside table and Charlotte gathered what few belongings they had been allowed. They moved toward the door as a family, together the way they should have been all along. But Howard Pierce waited at the bottom of the stairs with 2 men Ben recognized as enforcers who worked for Ernest Ashford. All 3 held weapons. Pierce smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "Put the boy down, Fletcher." "Get out of my way." "Can't do that. Judge's orders. Kids stay here." "My son is dying." "Then we'll get him a doctor after you leave." Ben looked at Pierce and saw a man who cared nothing for life or justice or anything except money and power. Saw someone who would let Noah die just to prove a point, just to maintain control. He turned to Emma and spoke quiet enough that only she could hear. "We Noah to the wagon. All of you." Go. Ben, they have guns. I know, but they won't use them. Not with witnesses watching from the street. Now go. Eamon understood, took Noah from his arms, gathered Charlotte and Thomas, moved toward the door while Ben descended the stairs slow and deliberate. Pierce raised his pistol. I'm warning you, Fletcher. And you're drawing onto me in front of half the town. That's your play. Through the broken front door, Ben could see neighbors gathering in the street, could see faces in windows, could see witnesses that made murder harder to justify. You're trespassing, kidnapping. I'm authorized to stop you. With lethal force against an unarmed man, try explaining that to the sheriff. Pierce hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. Ben used that hesitation. He moved. Military training and 5 years of ranch work and instincts, honed sharp by survival, all came together in violence that was controlled, precise, and utterly devastating. Ben disarmed Pierce in 2 seconds. The pistol clattered across marble floor, while Pierce clutched his wrist where Ben had bent it, past breaking. Before the 2 enforcers could react, Ben was on them. First man swung wild. Ben blocked and countered with an elbow to the face that shattered the enforcer's nose in a spray of blood and cartilage. Second man pulled a knife and slashed, catching Ben's forearm in a cut that burned and bled. Ben did not slow down. He caught the knife hand and twisted until bones snapped like dry wood. The enforcer screamed and dropped. Ben kicked his legs out from under him, and the man went down hard, head bouncing off marble. Pierce scrambled for his gun. Ben stomped on his hand with enough force to break bones. Pierce's scream joined the enforcers in a chorus of pain that echoed through the big house. 15 seconds. That was all it took. 3 men on the ground groaning and bleeding. Ben standing over them with blood running down his arm and death in his eyes. Martha Hayes stood in the doorway. She had followed from the ranch, arriving just in time to witness everything. Oh, Ben, what have you done? What he had to. What any father would do. What the law said was wrong, but morality demanded. Sheriff Davis arrived 10 minutes later with deputies and expressions that ranged from grim to sympathetic. He took in the scene with the tired eyes of a man who had seen too much and understood more than he wanted to. Benjamin Fletcher, you're under arrest for assault and trespassing. My son needed help. I know, but you broke the law doing it. You understand I have to take you in. Ben nodded. He had known this was coming the moment he kicked in that door, had accepted it as the price of saving Noah. Can I see my son first, make sure he's getting help? Sheriff looked at Emma standing by the wagon with Noah wrapped in her arms and 3 deputies already summoning the town doctor. 5 minutes. Ben walked to his family. Emma's eyes were red, but she was not crying. Charlotte and Thomas clung to her skirt. Noah lay limp in her arms, barely breathing. Doctor's coming, Emma said. He'll be okay. We'll all be okay. I have to go with the sheriff. I know. Get a lawyer. Theodore Morrison in Cheyenne. Sam knows him. Tell him everything. Ben, they could send you to prison for this. I know, but at least our son will live. He kissed her forehead and touched each child's face, memorizing them, in case these were the last moments of freedom he had for a long time. Then he turned to Sheriff Davis and held out his wrists. Let's go. The doctor arrived as they were loading Ben into the wagon. He examined Noah quickly, listening to lungs checking fever, his face growing darker with each finding. This child has severe pneumonia. Another day without treatment, and he would have died. He looked at Victoria Ashford standing in her doorway, face pale and shocked. You had custody of him, and you denied medical care. I was going to send for you. I just needed time to... To what? Let him die. You're coming with me to give a statement. Sheriff Davis added Victoria to his growing list of arrests. She protested all the way to the wagon, voice shrill with indignation that rang hollow against the evidence of her cruelty. The trial happened faster than Ben expected. 2 separate cases running parallel. Criminal charges against Ben for assault and trespassing. Civil charges related to the ranch and Catherine's estate. And new charges against Victoria for child endangerment. Theodore Morrison arrived from Cheyenne with a reputation for winning impossible cases and a mind sharp as broken glass. He listened to Ben's story without judgment, taking notes in precise handwriting. This is going to be close. You assaulted 3 men, broke into private property, took children against a court order. To save my son's life. I believe you. The question is whether a jury will. What are our chances? 50-50. May be better if the doctor's testimony is strong. If he confirms the child would have died self-defense and defense of others might apply. And if not, 5 to 10 years in territorial prison. Emma sat beside Ben in the small office, hand gripping as tight enough to hurt. Charlotte and Thomas waited outside with Martha. Noah was recovering at the ranch under the doctor's care, fever finally broken after 3 days of medicine and watchful nursing. "What about Victoria?" Emma asked. "What happens to her?" "She'll face child endangerment charges. If convicted, she'll never be allowed near children again. Might face jail time depending on how the judge feels." "And the ranch case, Ernest Ashford's claim?" Morrison's expression turned predatory. "That's where things get interesting. I've been investigating Ernest's background, found some irregularities in how he acquired several properties, loans that should not have been approved, foreclosures that happened suspiciously fast. He's corrupt, deeply, and I think I can prove it, which means the claim against your ranch is likely fraudulent, filed under false pretenses using Catherine's parents as puppets." For the first time since the arrest, Ben felt something like hope. "Can you win both cases?" "The criminal case depends on the jury, but the civil case, yes, I can destroy Ernest Ashford, and I'm going to enjoy doing it." The criminal trial came first. The courtroom was packed. Everyone in Cedar Ridge wanted to see whether the killer rancher would go to prison or walk free. Victoria's social circle sat in judgment. Sam and Martha sat in support. Emma held Charlotte and Thomas close, while Noah stayed home, still too weak. The prosecutor laid out the case with clinical precision. Ben had broken into the Ashford home, had assaulted 3 men with enough violence to send all 3 to the doctor, had taken children against direct court order. The law exists to protect us from men like Benjamin Fletcher, men who believe might makes right, who think violence solves problems. We cannot allow vigilantism, no matter how sympathetic the cause. Then Morrison stood for the defense. "The prosecutor is correct that law matters, but so does justice, and sometimes rarely the two conflict." He called the doctor first. "In your medical opinion, what would have happened to Noah Harrison if he had not received treatment when he did?" The doctor's voice was clear and firm. "He would have died. Pneumonia at that stage in a child that young without antibiotics or proper care, fatal within 24 to 48 hours. And Mrs. Ashford had been informed of his condition, according to the children's testimony repeatedly, for days. But she denied medical care." "Yes. So Mr. Fletcher had a choice. Let his son die while following legal process, or break the law to save a life." The prosecutor objected, but the point was made. The jury heard it, saw the choice not as lawlessness, but as impossible decision between legal compliance and moral imperative. Charlotte testified next. 8 years old in a dress borrowed from Martha Hare, braided, neat voice steady despite the crowd watching. "Mrs. Ashford wouldn't listen when I said Noah was sick. She said he was being fussy. But he wasn't fussy, he was dying. What did you do?" "I screamed out the window, for Papa Ben, because I knew he would come. I knew he wouldn't leave us there, even though coming meant breaking the law. Papa Ben says some things matter more than laws, like family, like love, like not letting people die when you can save them." The courtroom sat silent. Morrison let the words hang there, let the jury absorb the simple truth from a child's mouth. The prosecutor tried to recover with Pierce's testimony. But Pierce made a poor witness. His hatred for Ben was obvious. His willingness to let Noah die rather than lose control was evident in every defensive answer. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and read the verdict in a voice that shook slightly. "On the charge of assault, we find the defendant not guilty. On the charge of trespassing, we find the defendant not guilty." The courtroom erupted, half in cheers, half in outrage. Judge Montgomery banged her gavel until order was restored. "Mr. Fletcher, you are free to go. This court finds that your actions, while technically illegal, were justified under the doctrine of defense of others in imminent danger." She leaned forward, voice stern. "However, do not mistake this verdict for approval of vigilantism. You were fortunate that the circumstances were extraordinary. Do not test this court's patience again." "Yes, Your Honor." Ben walked free. Emma met him outside the courthouse with all three children. Noah still pale but smiling, and they held each other while Solder Ridge watched and judged and whispered. But Ben did not care about whispers anymore. His family was whole. His son was alive. The law had bent toward justice for once instead of breaking against it. The civil trial was shorter and more brutal. Morrison presented evidence of Ernest Ashford's fraudulent lending practices. Letters proving he had manipulated Catherine's elderly parents into filing the claim. Documents showing he planned to acquire the Fletcher Ranch through legal theft. Catherine's parents sat shocked as Morrison revealed how Ernest had used them. How he had promised them $5,000 to file a claim they knew was false. How he had planned to acquire the property and give them nothing. Judge Montgomery's fury was cold and precise. Mr. Ashford, you have committed fraud against this court and manipulated elderly citizens for personal gain. The claim against the Fletcher Ranch is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the territorial attorney for potential criminal prosecution. Ernest stood with all his power and wealth and influence evaporating around him like morning fog. Within a week, he would be disbarred. Within a month, investigated. Within a year, his bank would collapse and he would lose everything. But that victory, sweet as it was, came with a case that no one saw coming. During the chaos of the trials, while everyone's attention was focused on courtrooms and testimonies and legal battles, Howard Pierce made one final play. He broke into the Fletcher Ranch while it sat empty. Everyone was at the trial. Sam was testifying. Martha was supporting Emma. The house stood unguarded. Pierce knew about the documents Morrison had gathered. Evidence of Ernest's fraud. Proof that would destroy the Ashford empire completely. If he could destroy that evidence, maybe Ernest would pay him. Maybe there was still profit to be extracted from this disaster. Martha came home early. She had felt uneasy, some instinct warning that something was wrong. She found Pierce in Ben's study rifling through papers, destroying everything Morrison needed. "Get out," she said, voice steady despite the fear. Pierce turned with a knife in his hand. "Can't do that, old woman. I have work to finish." "Those documents are evidence in a legal case. Destroying them is a crime. Add it to the list." He advanced on her. Martha backed toward the safe where the most important papers were locked. Pierce saw the movement and understood. "Open it." "No. On it or I'll make you." Martha had lived 70 years, had survived poverty and loss and every hardship the frontier could throw at a woman alone. She had raised Ben from broken widower to functioning human, had loved him like the son she never had. She was not going to let this piece of garbage destroy everything Ben had built. "You'll have to kill me first." Pierce smiled. "That can be arranged." He stabbed her 3 times. Chest, abdomen, deep wounds that bled fast and fatal. Martha fell hand reaching for the alarm bell Ben had installed for emergencies. She pulled it once before dying. The sound carried across the ranch loud enough that Sam heard it from a mile away where he was riding back from town. He found Pierce still in the study covered in Martha's blood trying to open the safe. Sam did not waste words, just pulled Pierce from the house, beat him unconscious, and waited for the sheriff. While Martha bled out on the floor, Ben's mother had scrubbed clean for 10 years. By the time the doctor arrived, Martha Hayes was gone. Ben learned about it at the courthouse. Sam burst through the doors during closing arguments in the civil case, face gray and voice breaking. "Boss, it's Martha." The world stopped. Ben knew from Sam's expression, knew before words were spoken, knew in the way you know when someone you love is gone, when the world suddenly has a hole in it that nothing will ever fill. Pierce broke in. She tried to stop him. "She's dead." The courtroom disappeared. Sound went distant and strange. Ben stood and crossed to Sam in a daze, unable to process, unable to accept. "Where is he?" "Sheriff has him. Caught him red-handed with the knife." Ben turned toward the door. Emma caught his arm. "Ben, don't. He killed Martha." "I know, and he'll hang for it, but not by your hand." Ben looked at her and saw fear. Not of him. For him. Fear that if he went after Pierce now, he would become the monster everyone believed him to be. Would throw away everything they had won for revenge that would not bring Martha back. "I need to see her." "Okay, we'll go together." They went to the ranch house where Martha lay covered by a sheet in the room she had kept clean for a decade. Ben knelt beside her and pulled back the cover to see her face one last time. She looked peaceful, like she was sleeping. like she might wake up any moment and scold him for tracking mud on her clean floors, or missing meals, or drinking too much whiskey. But she would not wake up, would never scold him again, would never sit on the porch drinking coffee while they watched the sunrise, would never tell him stories about his mother, or give him advice he did not want but desperately needed. Gone. Because Ben's war with the Ashfords had spilled blood that should never have been shed. Emma knelt beside him and took his hand. "This is not your fault. I brought this to her door. My fight, my enemies. She died because of me. She died protecting you, protecting your family. She chose that, Ben. Chose to stand between you and harm. Don't dishonor that choice by taking the blame." But the blame felt heavy regardless. Another name on the list of people Ben had failed to protect. Another grave he would visit with guilt as his only offering. Pierce's trial for murder was swift and certain. Sheriff Davis testified, defining him with the knife. The doctor confirmed the wounds matched the weapon. There was no question of guilt, only of sentence. The jury took less than an hour. Guilty of first-degree murder, sentenced death by hanging, 2 weeks until execution. Before he died, Pierce sent a message to Ben, a confession implicating Ernest Ashford as the one who ordered the break-in, who paid Pierce $500 to destroy evidence by whatever means necessary. Ernest was arrested again, tried as accessory to murder, convicted, sentenced to 20 years hard labor in territorial prison. Victoria received 5 years for child endangerment and conspiracy. Judge Bartlett, facing his own investigation for corruption, resigned and left Wyoming Territory in disgrace. The villain system that had seemed so powerful, so untouchable, collapsed completely. But it did not feel like victory, not with Martha's grave fresh on the hill and her absence echoing through every room of the ranch house. The day of Pierce's execution came gray and cold. Ben stood outside the prison with Emma beside him. Watching was not required, but Ben felt he owed it to Martha to see justice served. Sheriff Davis approached with an offer that made Ben's blood run hot and cold at once. "You can pull the lever if you want. Victim's family right." Ben looked at the gallows, at the noose, at Howard Pierce standing on the platform with hands bound and face pale. 5 years ago, he would have done it without hesitation. Would have pulled that lever and felt satisfaction watching a murderer fall. Would have called it justice and slept easy. But Emma's hand was in his, and Martha's voice echoed in memory. "Violence begets violence, Ben. You can't build a future on revenge." "What would Martha want?" Emma asked quietly. Ben closed his eyes and remembered. Martha teaching Charlotte to bake bread. Martha telling stories to Thomas. Martha letting Noah help her in the garden. Martha who believed in second chances and redemption and the possibility of change. She would want mercy. "I can't give him mercy. He killed her. But I can refuse to participate in his death." To Sheriff Davis, "No, I won't pull the lever. Let the state do its job. I'm done killing." Emma squeezed his hand, pride and relief mixing in her expression. They watched the execution together. Watched Pierce fall and twitch and go still. Watched justice served by the law instead of by revenge. Then they turned away and walked back to their wagon, back to their life, back to building something that honored Martha's memory more than vengeance ever could. 6 months later, the Fletcher Ranch had changed in subtle ways that spoke of healing rather than forgetting. Emma's garden grew where Martha's had been, different plants, but same care. Charlotte's books lined the shelves Martha used to dust. Thomas worked the cattle with Sam, learning skills that would make him a rancher someday. Noah played with Thunder and a new puppy that followed him everywhere. And Emma stood on the porch, 8 months pregnant, hand on her swollen belly, watching sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and blood. Ben came up behind her and wrapped arms around her and their unborn child both. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, heavy, ready to meet this little one." "What should we name her?" "Still think it's a girl." "I know it's a girl." Ben smiled against her hair. Then Martha Grace, after 2 strong women who deserved better. Emma's eyes filled with tears. "And if it's a boy, Robert Michael. After 2 good men who never got the chance to grow old." "That's perfect." Sam rode up with news expression carefully neutral. "Boss thought you should know. Ernest Ashford died in prison last week. Infection from a wound that went bad." Ben felt nothing. No satisfaction, no grief, just empty acknowledgement of a life ended. Okay, that's it, just okay. What else is there? He's dead. Martha's dead. Revenge doesn't bring anyone back. I'm done keeping score. Sam nodded slowly. You've changed. Had to, for them. Ben looked at his family, at Charlotte reading on the porch steps, at Thomas and Noah playing in the yard, at Hemima carrying their future in her body. Can't be a killer and a father. Had to choose. 2 weeks later, Emma went into labor as the sun rose over the ranch. The birth was long and difficult, but she was strong and stubborn and refused to give up. Martha Grace Fletcher came into the world screaming with healthy lungs and a full head of dark hair. Ben held her in the nursery he had built 5 years ago for Michael, feeling the weight of history and hope mixed together in 5 pounds of new life. Emma lay exhausted in their bed hair, damp with sweat, face pale but smiling. She's beautiful. She's perfect. They're all perfect. Charlotte, Thomas, and Noah crowded around to see their new sister. Noah was most excited, chattering about how he would teach her to ride horses when she was bigger. Ben looked at his family, at Emma recovering from bringing new life into the world, at 3 children who called him Papa, at a baby girl named for the woman who had saved him more times than he could count. This was redemption, not in grand gestures or dramatic moments, but in ordinary morning light, in children's laughter, in a wife's steady presence, in the choice to build rather than destroy. 3 years later, the Fletcher Ranch had grown prosperous beyond even Ben's careful planning. The cattle herd was strong. The land was productive. The house that had once echoed with emptiness now rang with the chaos of children growing. Charlotte was 11, teaching Thomas and Noah their advanced lessons with patience their teachers envied. Thomas was 9, already showing the steady competence of a natural rancher. Noah was 7, still carrying thunder everywhere, but now riding real horses with the confidence of someone born to it. Martha Grace was 3, talking in full sentences and following her brothers around with determination to do everything they did. And Emma was pregnant again, due in the spring. Ben and Emma sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint familiar patterns across the skirting. The children played in the yard, their voices carrying on evening air that smelled of grass and dust and home. We did it, Emma said quietly. Did what? Built something good out of all that pain. Ben looked at the life they had created, at children who were loved and safe, at land that was productive in theirs, at a marriage that had survived trials that would have broken weaker bonds. Martha would be proud. Catherine, too. You think so? I think they would both want you happy. And you are, aren't you? Yes, for the first time in 8 years, yes. Charlotte called from the yard. Papa, come see what Tommy built. A miniature barn for Martha Grace's toy horses, carefully constructed with the attention to detail that Thomas brought to everything. Good craftsmanship, son. Thomas beamed with pride that made Ben's chest feel too tight. Noah added his request. Can we build a real barn next spring for more horses? Maybe, we'll see. Martha Grace toddled over and raised her arms. Up, Papa. Ben lifted her and she giggled, wrapping small arms around his neck. Emma watched from the porch, hand on her belly, feeling the baby kick. This was what they had fought for, what Martha had died protecting, what made all the struggle and pain and loss worth surviving. Not the land, not the money, not revenge or justice or vindication. Family, love, home, the simple miracle of people choosing each other every day and building something that mattered. As the sun set and the children came inside for dinner, Ben stood alone for a moment on the porch, looking at his land, at the lamplit windows of his home, at the life he had built from ashes. He spoke aloud to the woman who was not there to hear, but maybe heard anyway. Thank you, Martha, for everything, for staying when I was broken, for believing I could be better, for giving your life to protect this family. I'll make sure they know your name. I'll make sure they understand what you did. The wind carried his words away across the prairie, and maybe it was imagination, but Ben thought he felt something warm and gentle brush past him like a hand on his shoulder. Then he went inside to his family, to the noise and chaos and love that filled rooms built for ghosts, to the future that honored the past without being imprisoned by it. He was Benjamin Fletcher, former soldier, former killer, Former widower who had thought his life was over at 32. Now he was something better. Husband, father, builder of a life that mattered. And for the first time since Catherine died, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.